Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. We are going to throw on our historian's lenses and unpack a truly fascinating and, frankly, heartbreaking piece of history. We're looking at the rise and fall of one of Africa's absolute wealthiest and most remarkable ancient powers, the Great Kingdom of Benin. For centuries, this kingdom was a shining beacon of complex governance, immense wealth, and fierce independence. But as you'll see, when you have centuries of deeply rooted tradition colliding head-on with the sudden aggressive spread of European colonial pressures, well, the results were catastrophic. So let's explore exactly how this incredible civilization operated and how it was ultimately dismantled.
Okay, let's dive into this timeline so we can really grasp the sheer scale of the history we're talking about here. The Benin Kingdom wasn't just some brief flash in the pan, not at all. It gained prominence all the way back in the 11th century. By the 18th century, it was hitting a massive peak in early trade with European nations. We are literally talking about an 800-year-old sovereign power. But take a close look at how compressed those final dates become. From the Berlin Conference in 1885 to the Benin sacking in 1897 and its total absorption into colonial Nigeria in 1914. It took centuries to build up this magnificent kingdom, but just a few short, chaotic decades of relentless colonial pressure to completely tear down its independence.
Section 1. Rise of a Great Kingdom. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer, tangible wealth we're looking at. Geographically, we're in modern-day Benin City, in the Edo state of Nigeria, a real coastal powerhouse. Historical records show it was one of the oldest and most developed states in the entire West African coastal hinterland. For over 200 years leading up to its peak, it just kept rising, enjoying this immense, uninterrupted prosperity. And the engine behind all that? A very strong, incredibly organized monarchy, led by rulers known as the Obas. Benin was actually one of the earliest African kingdoms to establish highly successful trade channels with the outside world. Look at what they were exporting: gold, ivory, timber, pepper, and these stunning local artifacts. As far back as the 18th century, they were amassing incredible fortunes, especially trading with the Portuguese. They weren't just getting by, they were an absolute economic powerhouse, sitting on resources the European markets desperately wanted.
Section 2. Masters of Coastal Trade.
So how do you hold on to that kind of wealth for hundreds of years? You need strategic genius, and that's exactly what the Obas had. They didn't just have resources, they had serious economic discipline. The Obas strictly managed a single trade route with the outside world, making sure all that wealth fortified the kingdom itself. Let's look at this comparison here, because it perfectly captures the root of the whole conflict. On the left, we have the Obas strategy, border-only trade. For centuries, they successfully kept Europeans out of the kingdom's interior. You want the gold, the ivory, you trade at the ports. This protected their local artifacts and kept their sovereignty totally intact. But look over on the right. By the late 19th century, we see the British demand. They were done waiting at the borders. They wanted total access to the interior and absolute political and economic control over the whole region. It was just a massive clash of worldviews.
Section 3. The Colonial Squeeze.
Right about here is where the tension starts to rapidly escalate. Up until 1885, despite centuries of trading with Europeans, Benin had managed to mostly dodge direct British reckoning. But the global landscape was shifting fast, and imperial ambitions were spreading like wildfire. That brings us to this incredibly pivotal moment, the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. Thousands of miles away in Europe, foreign powers were literally just drawing lines on a map. And just like that, this conference placed the West African region under a British protectorate. Suddenly, the sweeping, borderless ambition of the British Empire was laid directly over the map of the sovereign, deeply established Benin Kingdom. The British essentially claimed authority over a state that was completely self-governing and totally unaccustomed to answering to anyone else.
So, how do you force a powerhouse kingdom into submission? Well, the British deployed a brutal economic tactic. They cut off the trade channels. This wasn't just some political spat. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't really a negotiation at all. It was deliberate economic strangulation. It inflicted massive financial losses on everyone involved: the traders, the middlemen from the Asakiri Kingdom, and the local Niger Coast Protectorate government. It completely flipped the centuries-old trade dynamics that had made the region so rich, intensely squeezing the Benin Kingdom in an attempt to force them to open their doors.
Section 4. Oba Ovenrumen's Defiance.
Enter the ruler during this incredibly tense era, Oba Ovenrumen. And so the crucial point here is that we as historians absolutely cannot view him as some passive figure just swept away by a colonial tide. No way. He was a resolute leader making highly calculated geopolitical decisions to protect his people. His core strategy, the closed-door policy. Despite the insane economic pressure and the blockades we just talked about, the Oba flat-out refused to bow to the British. He wouldn't let their troops in for any reason. Just like the Obas before him, he clung fiercely to policies of total independence, economic exclusiveness, and a strict trade monopoly. He knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that letting the British in meant the end of his sovereignty.
And, his defiance wasn't just him being stubborn, it was based on really sharp observation. Oba Ramwin had a front-row seat to the cautionary tales playing out right next door. He saw the devastating British activities in the neighboring kingdoms of Opobo and Ashanti. The alarming fate of those states basically proved his point, and it heavily reinforced his strict adherence to the closed-door policy. He saw exactly what British protection actually looked like in practice, and he firmly decided, nope, we are keeping our borders locked.
Section 5. The 1897 Benin Sacking.
All right, we have now reached the boiling point. The British, for sure, were not going to tolerate any insubordination from a territory they now claimed as their protectorate. Word of the Oba's defiance made its way straight to the Queen's office in England. The consular office got the green light from the British government, and the mandate was clear: bring the Oba under control at all costs. But every massive military escalation needs a trigger, right? Well, here it is. The stated justification for the invasion was an alleged ambush of a previous British party led by Acting Consul General James Phillips. The British consular office used this specific preceding event as the ultimate excuse to launch a series of massive, retaliatory attacks to completely capture the Benin Kingdom.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of what happened next. 1,200. Just let that sink in. That is the number of heavily armed men mobilized into an army under Sir Harry Rawson for the invasion. Against a kingdom that had spent hundreds of years trading peacefully at its borders, this was an astonishingly large, devastatingly equipped force, and they were sent with one singular purpose: absolute conquest. The events of February 1897 are just incredibly somber. History calls this the Benin Expedition, or the Benin Sacking. Step 1. British forces violently attack the kingdom. Step 2. Oba Ramwin, who fought so fiercely to defend his nation's independence, was deposed and exiled from his own home. And Step 3, the kingdom was entirely looted of its spectacular artifacts, the literal treasures they had guarded for centuries, and the city was burnt to the ground. It was just total physical and cultural destruction.
The aftermath of Rawson's invasion was completely permanent. The once great Benin Kingdom, this unbelievable powerhouse of trade and culture, fell. By 1914, the final nail was in the coffin, as the fallen territory was officially absorbed into the newly formed colonial Nigeria. The independence of a sovereign monarchy that had stood tall for 800 years was just permanently erased from the map.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. When an 800-year-old kingdom, one that's bursting with wealth, art, and complex governance, is violently burned, and its priceless artifacts are looted all in a single month, how does history even begin to measure that kind of loss? The story of the Great Kingdom of Benin is an amazing testament to African ingenuity and prosperity, but it's also this incredibly stark reminder of the devastating, irreplaceable cost of colonial ambition. Think about that as you process everything we've uncovered today. Thank you so much for joining me, and as always, keep learning.